Our preview of every team going to the World Cup continues, and if you believe it or not, we're already in Group E, and that means we're with the Pot 1 team, España. One of the big brand names in international football for more than a decade. They won back-to-back Euros about 10 years ago. They won the World Cup about 10 years ago, but making this World Cup was anything but certain until the final match day. Their qualifying group was not easy. They had Sweden, they had Greece, and you could tell it was uncomfortable early. After all, the first match they played at home in Granada, and they drew against a Greek team that really didn't have too much of a chance to get to the World Cup this time around. Then you go on the road to Tbilisi, which granted is a long away day, and you only win by a goal against Georgia. Cue everybody trying to say Fischer Kvaratskhelia. Sound it out with me. Fischer Kvaratskhelia. I don't understand what the problem is here. That human Scrabble board did actually score to take the lead for Georgia until Spain was able to put them away with a 92nd minute goal from Dani Olmo, so incredibly comfortable. The next match, okay, you win at home against Kosovo, but then you go to Sweden and lose, at which point Spain looked like they were long odds to make the World Cup. Fortunately for Spain, they turned it around and won their next 4 matches. Even with all of those good results in tow, those first 3 wins, they needed to win on the final day against Sweden in order to guarantee automatic qualification. If you finish second in Europe, then you have to go through this whole precarious playoff system. Spain was able to keep Sweden out of the back of the net, and then of course Alvaro Morata, Spain's perpetual hero, showed up to score the goal that guaranteed Spain would go to the World Cup as a first place qualifier. And this is something that is incredibly regular for the Spanish national team. They have qualified for every World Cup since 1978, which, given the fact that Italy's failed to qualify for 2 in a row in spite of winning the European Championship, makes that even more impressive. They're on an incredible heater when it comes to getting to the World Cup and being consistently good. What is fascinating is that in that entire stretch from 1978 to 2018, which I'll save you the math, that's 10 World Cups, it's a stretch of 40 years, they have only gotten past the quarterfinals 1 time. Now, this is when they did actually win the whole thing, their first and only World Cup title in 2010, but it's still noteworthy to point out that even though Spain is always considered one of the best teams in the world, they have struggled to get to the latter stage of the World Cup in the way that, say, France has. It gets even worse when you look at recent World Cups. See, Spain has only won 1 game at each of the last 2 World Cups. And it gets even worse when you look at their group. Now, Spain's group, particularly in 2018, was Spain, Portugal, tough, Iran, and Morocco. Easier. Spain started and played one of the all-time matches against Portugal. Okay, that ends in a draw, but then Spain needs 1 goal in the 54th minute from Diego Costa to survive Iran. And then in a match against Morocco, Spain goes behind 2 separate times and needs a goal in the 91st minute to avoid hanging on a perilous cliff that would have seen them qualifying by not goal difference, certainly not points, but 1 goal for over Iran. That's how close that was until Isco popped a ball in the 91st minute, and Spain ended up actually winning its group, and despite the fact they only won 1 game. And winning your group gives you an easier draw, so they got to play against Russia, the hosts, in the round of 16, which Spain also failed to win. They lost in penalty kicks in the round of 16 to a team they absolutely on talent should have been able to beat. It is a World Cup experience that could be described as highly uncomfortable after their embarrassment at the hands of the Netherlands in 2014 as revenge for the 2010 World Cup final. In continental competitions, which have happened obviously more recently since the World Cup 4 years ago, Spain has still not provided signs that it is back to being the dominant force we saw a decade ago. In the 2020 Euros, which of course happened last year, Spain finished second behind Sweden, the team they actually had to beat in qualifying in order to freaking get to the World Cup in the first place. Spain drew Sweden, drew Poland, and then had to blow out freaking Slovakia on the final day, which they did in order to get into the knockout stages in second position. In the round of 16, Spain beat Croatia in extra time, beat Switzerland in penalties, which is far too uncomfortable, and then lost to Italy in penalties. And this is starting to build a theme of the Spanish team we've seen over the last 4 years. A team that really struggles to put other teams away in spite of their superior talent. Extra time, penalties, draws all over qualifying, draws all over the Euros. And even though they've made at least the semifinals in 3 of the last 4 European championships, it still doesn't feel incredibly encouraging. They haven't showed up in a knockout stage and beaten a really good team. Sort of thing happened in the Nations League as well. Spain won their Nations League group at the top level. They're going to the Nations League Final 4. but they only did it with a +3 goal difference, and they only won 3 of the 6 games they played. Spain started its Nations League run with a draw against Portugal, a draw against Czechia, then managed some wins over Switzerland and Czechia, but lost to Switzerland. Then Spain had to go beat Portugal on the final day, which it did 1-0 in order to get into the Nations League final. My biggest takeaway is that Spain didn't score more than 2 goals in any of the 6 Nations League matches. They cannot score in bunches. Spain needs some juice. It needs some energy. And it has that in my player to watch for Spain, which I remind you, it's not the best player on the team, but the player that could make the pivotal difference for the team that you need to be looking out for. And that player is Pedri, a young 19-year-old at Barcelona who has already played 91 games. And if you follow the sport really at all, you probably already know who Pedri is. He has 14 caps for Spain at 19, and perhaps most impressively, he was on this Euros team last year that made him the youngest ever player to appear for Spain at a European Championships, like ever, for the 3-time European champions. And that wasn't the only thing he did last summer. He went and played at the Olympics, which is a glorified under-23 tournament, in case you didn't know, and he got all the way to the final with Spain there, and lost 2-1 in extra time to Brazil in that final. He is a pivotal attacking midfielder who will be key to Spain for a generation to come, and for a country that's been looking for its next generation after a golden generation that brought it 3 international trophies, Pedri seems to be leading that line, along with Gavi, who features in a 3-man midfield that Spain will likely be using. We look at what they're going to use formationally. They've been running 4-3-3, it feels like, since the beginning of time. The issue is really on the front line. Alvaro Morata, Ferran Torres, and Sarabia. That's the 3-man front that they're most likely going to use, and they struggle to get massive amounts of goals out of them. Ferran Torres, the most promising player there. He scored 4 goals in qualifying, but there's only so much you can take from that. The midfield is, of course, Gavi and Pedri. Gavi, another wonder kid at Barcelona, in front of Sergio Busquets, who is an old dude on Barcelona, part of that golden generation who's almost certainly playing in his last World Cup. But the underrated part of this team for Spain is the fact they have Eric Garcia and Aymeric Laporte as their 2 center backs. These are world-class center backs with the ball at their feet and defensively as well. They're 2 center backs that fit Spain's style of play to a T, and that is to hold the ball and poke and prod and be entirely press resistant, and that's what both of these guys are. Dani Carvajal and Jordi Alba provide veteran fullback experience. They're kind of part of the old guard, and that's the likely 11 with Unai Simon in goal. This is a look at the way they lined up in their last Nations League game, most recent match we have on record, and of course a competitive match as well. It shows the depth they have in the midfield. Rodri's fantastic, Koke's fantastic, Carlos Soler is fantastic, but up front you still see Sarabia, Morata, and Torres, because who else is going there? In this call-up you can see them exploring various options, from Nico Williams, who's at Bilbao and is, while very, very good and way better than I am, a second-tier type of offensive talent, or Yeremy Pino, a guy who's been fantastic and is a developing wonder kid in the Spanish league, but is he ready for the step to contribute to the national team? Really, this team's got depth and quality in the back 2/3 of the field, and as a result, they can possess and stop anyone, but they can't score in bunches, and that means the margin is very fine. So is Spain a favorite for the World Cup? I say no. Spain hasn't done anything to prove to me that they are actually capable of going all the way and winning the World Cup. The stats and the historical trends don't bear it out. Now, 4 years from now, I think Spain's going to be amazing. You have Pedri and Gavi coming through, and you're just going to need a few more guys, maybe a seasoned Ferran Torres, to really contribute at that top world-class level. The thing for Spain is the margin between glory and like a semi-final or final run and getting grouped at this World Cup is so thin, because they just don't score a lot of goals. They can possess against anyone. Their group is also tougher than people realize. You have Germany, who's always great. You have Costa Rica, who is stunningly hard to beat at the World Cup. They've been in the World Cup quarterfinals less than a decade ago. And then there's Japan, who I think a lot of us would acknowledge outplayed Belgium for the majority of a round of 16 match 4 years ago. They're teams with World Cup experience. They won't be intimidated at all, and they know how to win on the world's biggest stage. And for Spain, that could be tricky. So no, I'm not going crazy. I'm picking Spain to finish second in the group. They could totally win the group, but I would not be surprised if they got knocked out in the group stage. I would not be surprised if they made the final. 1 or 2 moments, 1 or 2 set pieces that could decide the entire direction that this World Cup goes in, and whether this is a memorable one for Spain or one they would like to forget as soon as humanly possible. If you want to see if I'm right, though, I will be live streaming a watch along to every World Cup match at the Twitch link down in the description. I hope you're able to join us, and you can keep this binge going. No problem. There's a playlist of every preview we've done so far, and that playlist will be updated every day until the World Cup starts, previewing every team that will be there. So, boom, go, showtime.